nothing to be sorry on that, sir. And
आज सिर्फ थोड़ा अनयूजुअल डिफिकल्टीज वाला डे है। मेरे घर का इंटरनेट बंद था, एनआईवी आया हूँ, डोंगल मेरा एकदम क्रैक ऑफ न होए। मैं देखूंगा कहीं डिस्टरबेंस आया तो थोड़ा रुकना पड़ेगा, मुझे फिर एक बार प्लग करना पड़ेगा।
नहीं 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 नहीं, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, आप रुक करके वो तो बीच में छोड़ करके फिर ज्वाइन कर लेना, उसमें कोई वो नहीं है।
हाँ मैं कर लूंगा सर।
हाँ हाँ हाँ। सो अरे जयवीर, इसको क्या कर दिया भाई, इसको मेरे को शेयर करने दो ना, फर्स्ट वाला जो है ना। अरे मैंने कर दिया, वो शेयर वाला नीचे से गायब कर दिया ना तुमने, यार क्या करते हो। हाँ मैंने छोड़ दिया, मतलब तुम इसको क्या करते हो यार, इसको नीचे मत करो भाई, मेरे को अपने हिसाब से करने दो। हाँ लेट मी डू। हाँ तो वो हाँ हाँ कर दिया भाई, कर दिया भाई, कर दिया। ये आपका वो आ गया बीच में, एनी डेस्क वाला आ गया, क्या करूं इसको। क्या करते हो यार तुम, ऐसे मत किया करो भाई। सॉरी सॉरी फॉर द टेक्निकल ग्लिच। उसको डोंट डोंट डू इट विद दैट। हाँ मेरे को अब करूं।
सर क्या इंट्रोडक्शन करने की कोई जरूरी नहीं है, आप कुछ भी बोले तो भी ठीक है।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, नहीं नहीं, वो हमारे जो जो रूटीन का जो है वो प्रोग्राम। So let us start with the prayer. Well, thank you very much, and good evening and welcome all. And I was always impressed with the ये रामचरित मानस के एक दोहे से जो है, I always used to start my programs with this, that all felicity of heavenly pleasures cannot be equated with the happiness by even a moment of spiritual discourse. I take it as an academic discourse. So any academic discourse even for a moment is much more than any of the pleasures. So welcome to the this we have called it, we started with as a PGNR, that means a webinar program for the postgraduates. So we started with as a PGNR program, and now it has become very popular and as a brand, and being looked after by many people throughout the world. So welcome to this almost 50th session of the PGNR. And this is a digital seminar organized by, we have called it as a Dermatologist Consortium of India. Because most of the countries, dermatologists, all people, they all cooperate very well, and we are all together. So we have labeled it like that. And for that purpose, I just wanted to share another thing in the sense that I was very much impressed that I started this program as alone. मैं तो मजरू सुल्तानपुरी की जी की जो गजल थी कि मैं तो अकेला ही चला था जाने पे मंजिल, लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया। अब तो कारवां इतना बड़ा बढ़िया हो गया that today we have got along with us Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar. Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar is a Padma Shri awardee and a very impressive personality and a knowledgeable man who will be with us speaking with that. And along with that, we have kept this session as a Karamveer special session. Karamveer special means people, those who are working in the field of Corona and frontline workers, they will be, they are here. So welcome, Dr. Ganga Khedkar. Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar is an old friend of mine, and it's a virtual welcome and giving you a virtual bouquet. I hope you can smell the
Thank you, sir.
good thing of the rose flowers. Can you smell it with the?
Yeah. I do.
Thank you very much.
It doesn't
Thank you
need
very much.
anything else.
And we have got our guest of honor today, a very prestigious man, Dr. V.M. Katoch, who was Director ICMR, Director JALMA, who was the Secretary to Government of India earlier. And now he's connected with Jaipur, so we are lucky to have him here. Another chairperson is Dr. N.K. Mathur, sir. Dr. N.K. Mathur was my teacher. And Dr. Viren Singh, who is the president of this Asthma Society, and this, he'll be joining later on. So, Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar, Doctor, I request Dr. U.S. Agarwal, who is our ex-principal of HMS Medical College, to kindly introduce Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar formally. Dr. U.S., please.
Evening, sir.
Very good evening.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है सर?
थोड़ा कम आ रही है, थोड़ा जोर से.
Good evening.
हाँ, थोड़ा आगे से होकर के जोर से.
सर आवाज.
हाँ.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. It is my proud privilege and honor to introduce today one of the very known figure in the nationally and internationally, a researcher, scientist, and academician, Padma Shri Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar. All of us, all of you, and we all know him very well. He does not need any introduction, but still to brief about something about him. At present, he is holding the position of C.G. Pandit, National Chair, Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi. He was former head, Division of the Epidemiology and Communicable Disease, ICMR, New Delhi, and Director in charge, National AIDS Research Institute, Pune. He received the Padma Shri Award this year on 2020, and as head of the Epidemiology and Communicable Disease, he managed recent outbreak of Nipah, Zika, and COVID-19. He has been working in field of HIV disease for over 3 decades. He is an expert in HIV medicine and associated infectious diseases, epidemiology, and public health. He was one of the key players in the advocacy since 1989 and has been involved in making at national level on antiretroviral therapy, management of the opportunistic prevention of the mother-to-child transmission, and STI management, in addition to the other key population-specific policies. He has been a member of the many prestigious international committees on different facets of the HIV disease, including those constituted by ACTG, WHO, UNICEF, and UNAIDS. He has over more than 200 publications to his credit and published 5 books on the HIV infection. Sir, we will be very happy and will be obliged to listen to you today about the coronavirus in this pandemic.
Where is the? अरे ये जयवीर क्या हो गया भाई? जयवीर
आ रही है आपकी आवाज आ रही है?
नहीं हाँ नहीं, वो एक्चुअली में ये क्या हुआ, मैं पहले सबको इंट्रोडक्शन की स्लाइड्स लगा रखी थी, लेकिन ये सम और अदर ये भी तो सब ऐसे ही ये होते हैं ना. ये जयवीर आगे नहीं जा रही है भाई. हाँ, नाउ यस, डॉक्टर ललित. Dr. Lalit, to please introduce Dr. V.M. Katoch. Dr. Lalit, can you listen me? Anyway, Dr. Lalit is not here, but we are very proud to have Dr. Katoch who is a very senior person and who did his MD from 1978 from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and he obtained specialized training in USA. He was director JALMA. He was director ICMR. He has been awarded with lot many research awards, and his method of rapid diagnostic in TB, leprosy, and DNA chips. And then he was director of Indian Council of Medical Research, and he was secretary to Government of India. And he was a very positive man, and he will be our guest of honor. And he has very kindly consented to be here and wind up the session in the end, give his expert comments after that. Then we have got today's chairperson, our Dr. N.K. Mathur. Dr. N.K. Mathur is a very senior dermatologist. He was a superintendent of SMS Hospital, and he has worked he was basic researcher, worked a lot in leprosy as well as HIV/AIDS, and now he's working in Corona also. But he has refused me to divulge anything over here in this thing. But he's a very innovative man, and he works in the field of medicine as well as the alternative medicines also, homeopathy. We have got another chairperson, Dr. Viren Singh, with us, who is a prestigious alumnus of SMS Medical College. He also worked as a superintendent of SMS Medical College and SMS Hospital, and he's almost like he's of Gandhian Vichardhara, and something very unique man to be. And most important thing is that he's a famous pulmonologist and asthma specialist. He suffered from COVID himself, and but did not stop looking after the patients. And now he's one of the frontline worker in the field of HIV/AIDS, field of Corona. Sorry. And we have got these 10 Karamveer specials which will be speaking on their experiences in that. Dr. Nitya Vyas, Professor and Head of Microbiology, SMS Medical College. Dr. Puneet Rijwani, Professor and Head of Medicine at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College. Dr. Alok Mathur, who is a Senior Consultant in EHCC Hospital. Dr. Raghav Shah, who is a this डॉक्टर अच्छा ऑल राइट इसके पहले वो ये मेरे आगे वो आ रहा था तो आई कुड नॉट सी डॉक्टर जसवंत गोयल who is the chief of in this clinical pharmacology and the chief executive in JNU Medical College. Then Dr. Raghav Shah, who is a clinical अरे ये क्या हो रखा है भाई ये जयवीर इसको बंद करो हैं क्या करता है Dr. Raghav Shah is a DM in psychiatry who works in de-addiction, and a very typical man with all this stress and strain. He looks after very well. And Dr. Puneet Gupta is a physician in charge for this. क्या कर रहे हो भाई ये? Dr. Puneet Gupta, Gaurav, I'll kill you. Sorry for the. Dr. Puneet Gupta is in CK Birla Hospital. He is a physician in charge for that. Dr. R.K. Purwal is a man of infectious diseases. He works in Manipal Hospital. Dr. Pankaj Verma, he is from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and then from Chandigarh. He has got his education, and he is also a physician and in charge of corona cases. Dr. Madhur Joshi is a pulmonologist. Dr. Rishabh Bansal is a man of geriatric medicine from All India Institute of Medical Sciences and working over here in this thing. So welcome you all these people. We will be starting with that. Now I invite Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar to kindly start his deliberations. Dr. Raman, let me first.
सर उनको मेरा
एक मिनट मैं खुद ही करूंगा, मेरे साथ में कोई ज्यादा नहीं है। वो आज थोड़ा सा मैंने उसको लड़के को जो मेरे साथ में काम करता है उसको मैंने बुलाया था, तो वो लेट मी, अरे इसको वो करो भाई, कैसे कर दिया तुमने इसको? स्टॉप शेयर था वो कर सकते हैं शेयर इसकी। अरे भाई तुम चुप करो यार, इसको एडवांस शेयरिंग वाले में करो। एडवांस शेयरिंग में तुमने किया नहीं, कर सकते हैं, बेकार की बातें करते हो। चलो हम तेरे को यार गलत ही बोलेंगे यार। डॉक्टर रमन प्लीज, all is yours. Yes, we can see your screen. Good.
सर अभी आवाज सुनाई दे रहा
बिल्कुल
है?
बिल्कुल, बढ़िया बढ़िया आ रहा है, बढ़िया आ रहा है, फर्स्ट क्लास।
नहीं, आई
वेरी
मस्ट
वेरी फेमिलियर एंड पॉपुलर, फेमिलियर वॉइस एंड
नहीं,
वेरी नाइस।
ये थोड़ा 2 मिनट तो इंग्लिश में बात नहीं करूंगा, देशी भाषा में बात करूंगा। माथुर साहब का तो हमारे पुराने दोस्त है, उन्होंने बुलाया, ये हमारे लिए यानी बहुत बड़ी बात है। सबसे बड़ी बात उससे ऊपर है कि हमारे पुराने डीजी डॉक्टर कटोच साहब ना, वो हमको चेयर करने का सौभाग्य मिल रहा है, इससे बढ़ के कुछ नहीं हो सकता है। और कोविड के वैसी बीमारी में इतने जल्दी अपडेट के लिए बुलाया जाना, ये भी कोविड का कोविड का इफेक्ट है। तो हम आगे चल के देखेंगे। What I'm today I had one of the toughest times because my home internet was down. Worse still, when I came to NIV, NIV's internet is also not functional well. I am working on my own dongle. It is still possible that at the end of the talk it may just give up because I have already received a warning, you have exceeded 50% quota. But if I disappear afterwards, please don't blame me for anything. That is all beyond my control. So let's try and look at COVID-19. No? Let's try to get some kind of update where we are and what are the things as of now to be thought of. Now, if you actually look at where we are today, no, in terms of numbers, we were close to crossing over USA, which was #1 country. Fortunately, our daily loads that had increased dramatically, where we had become #1, have gone down now. And today, what we are seeing is USA again comes back as #1. But if you think of, people tend to blame that we may not be testing enough. If you look at the data, it tends to tell you that our testing has been almost close to 5% of seropositivity that is desired by WHO. So our testing rates have also gone up. But despite that, there are certain worries that come to our mind. Why did we face such a rapid increase in caseload? There are certain things which we must remember, that the disease has a very high transmissibility. It has non-specific symptoms, so most often people may not come to test, and therefore they spread across, the reservoir increases. The key drivers are particularly some things which are against us: the population density, mobility, and migration, which are pretty high. When it comes to metropolitan cities and large towns, you find they have highest vulnerability and a huge population size, as high as almost small countries across in the globe. Unfortunately, the seeds of infection have established quickly in the cities, and therefore you are seeing larger numbers or increases across in India. Are we testing enough is a question which people tend to ask. If you actually look at our testing, you will find that when you compare it with certain countries, we suddenly find test per 100,000 population tend to appear to be low. But what is more important that for us to understand, that despite that, our average percent seropositivity per day continues to hover around the lower side, which essentially means that the infection, though people tend to say otherwise, has not spread or has not infected as many individuals. So it is possible that perhaps it is in the first few phases of infection, or perhaps we have lower outbreak in the country as such. Now, when we talk about this, there are certain things which we have to understand, that we come to know about this only when you test them. So we do RT-PCRs, which require about 4 to 5 hours of time. It's a gold standard, but there is one thing which we have to understand: the sensitivity ranges between 49 to 71%, which is very low. Though it is a gold standard, it's an unusual situation that you perhaps tend to see. And we need to remember that you have a limited capacity to go for RT-PCR testing, because you can you can do 90 tests in a single run, and therefore you need to worry unless you put high throughput machines all across the country, which is perhaps not desirable, though certain cities tend to have it. And you require adequate biosafety because of the risk of transmissibility. When it comes to that, it was overcome by initiating for the first time in the world the point of care antigen detection test. And this point of care antigen detection test, it required only 45 minutes to complete. But at the same time, when you compare it with RT-PCR, it had certain disadvantage that the sensitivity ranged between 50 to 84%. Now, which essentially means false negatives are likely to be more in these circumstances, and therefore the advice was given that any negative result in a symptomatic individual, you must do RT-PCR test. And that's something which is critical for us. Now you see globally that other countries have started using rapid antigen tests, which were hitherto not there. This was the first test that we use across globally. Now, when it comes to sensitivity of antibody test, which is another thing, now you suddenly see that the sensitivity of IgM and IgG doesn't vary as much, but IgM tends to be little lower in terms of sensitivity. And if you see that the whole thing can start between 8 to 14 days, you find that the sensitivity increases to close to about 90 odd percent in 15 to 21 days. And that's the reason we tend to say that these antibody tests should be done only 3 weeks after the person becomes symptomatic. Now, if you look at IgG antibody test, they have a high sensitivity and specificity. The test that was developed by NIV was having sensitivity of 92% and specificity of 99%. However, people thought that they could use it as immunity passport, which may not, which is a questionable way of thinking now that we know certain things which we will see subsequently. Now, if you look at doing IgG test as immunity passport, this appears to be a distant dream. The reason is we don't know whether the immune protection that comes, how long does it last? And we do not know how much of protection does it actually confer. Both the things are likely to be different. Evidence of reinfection has already been shown, and there are certain studies which have shown that the antibody levels tend to come off between 2 to 4 months time, though these findings have also been questioned by 2 studies that have been recently published. One study that was done in Iceland, which showed that by 4 months there was not much of a drop in antibody levels. So this is one issue which is not settled. Even small numbers of reinfection tend to make you think that either the antibody levels are likely to go down, or you have different species or clades of infection against which you don't have protection if you are infected by one of the clades of this particular virus. Now, WHO tends to say that we must have less than 5% seropositivity. Now, that means you need to test as much as possible. So does this essentially mean, which we are coming close to 5% as of now, does this mean that our outbreak is yet to mature, or is it a reflection of test kits that have been used? And the reason why we keep on thinking about it is each negative rapid antigen test must be followed by RT-PCR, and that perhaps may not be occurring as much. So those who are false negative may be lurking there, and that's the reason the numbers may be higher. You will also find that seropositivity rates may be found to be lower because you are using rapid antigen test as one of the key tests, which may or may not be followed with RT-PCR as much. Now, one question that is always asked, when will we peak? Today, we think we have reached the peak because you are seeing that there is a drop in number of infections that are observed every day. But we need to understand one thing. India is a highly populous country. It tends to have different population density, different levels of migrations, Now, within the states, you find there is heterogeneity in terms of outbreak in different states as such, and mobility is extremely high in India. It's very difficult to assume peaks in India because overall peak may or may not be seen as visibly as you might see in rest of the countries which are very small. So there is a fear of a second wave. But when you talk of fear of second wave, there are certain things which come to everybody's mind. The winter is about to set in, where you are likely to see that the pollution increases. And every increase in 2.5 micron particles of per ppm, you find that the risk of acquisition increases by close to about 9 times. Now, essentially, this is something which is going to be a major botheration, but there is seasonal influenza, which is also likely to be partner in crime, like we had in HIV. We also had TB, which was a partner in crime. Now, these together may make a difference, but there is a positive side to it. The positive side to it is that if we continue to go for universal masking, all these will have limited impact. The issue is we'll have to promote the use of universal masking among the people at this juncture. But supposing if influenza comes and influenza strikes us hard enough, so if you look at influenza and COVID-19, you find both of them have droplet infections as one of the modes of transmission. You find that the transmission efficiency of COVID-19 is higher than influenza. You find that the transmission in influenza tends to occur in symptomatic phase more often compared to COVID-19, where transmission occurs in 2 days prior to development of symptoms and 2 days post development of symptoms. You find that the number of cases that you would find having secondary transmissions is close to about 74%. And then it continues, 26% of the cases acquire it from 3 to 10 days time. Now, if you look at incubation period, the incubation period is about 2 days in influenza, whereas here it's about 5 days. You find pregnant women and children are perhaps more susceptible or vulnerable, also not only for acquiring infection, but also severity in influenza. Though it is similar, we find that children may not be so much susceptible in COVID-19 in terms of severity, but they may be more susceptible to acquire these particular infections. Symptoms may more or less be similar, but you find that in children in COVID-19, you find that there could be MIS, which is one of the severe manifestations that you might see. If you look at case fatality rate, influenza has still continues to have lower case fatality rate compared to that in COVID-19. You have different treatment that you could offer to them. What one must remember if one has to distinguish, influenza is severe in the first week of occurrence of symptoms. And if you look at COVID-19, you find that the severity is associated to the second week after becoming symptomatic. You may have to do 2 different kinds of PCR for diagnosis. Best is to offer both the PCRs during the season and provide influenza vaccine to the risk group could be one of the strategies that we may adopt. If you look at COVID-19, it's a mysterious disease to my mind. It has 6 mysteries that we are yet to answer really well. One, it's a multisystemic disease which starts with the throat and pneumocytes in the lungs. However, there is very low transient viremia that tends to occur. Now that's complete surprise because multisystemic diseases by and large had a spread that occurs through the blood. The spectrum of infection, it's very wide. Majority of them will be asymptomatic and they would have event-free episode of infection. However, a small proportion would have severe disease. There is very low infection fatality rate, but then suddenly when you look at physicians, you find there could be a selection bias in those what are being reported, but the mortality rate appears to be very high among physicians for 10 to 15%. We really do not know what could be the reasons as such. Reinfections are already being reported in a short span, which are indicative of unreliable immunity after infection. And it causes sequelae even among asymptomatics is something which is a matter of concern. If you look at the pathophysiology of COVID, no, it starts with a local infection. It enters the ACE2 receptor using ACE2 receptor and TIMPRESS receptor. And then there is a direct cytotoxic effect on ACE2. There is dysregulation of RAS in the second level. And in the third level, you find that there is endothelial damage. And in the fourth, there is a dysregulated response, the immune response, which we call as cytokine storm, which more often than not ends up into a very negative adverse outcome. You look at the extrapulmonary manifestations, it appears as if the virus has entered across in different parts of the body, but that may not be really true. You look at the manifestations, they are neurologic, renal, hepatic, gastrointestinal, thromboembolism, cardiac, endocrine, and dermatological. Now that's something which is a big surprise. How that happens will require more time to understand, will require more time to conduct research on them. What are the different mechanisms through which the virus is able to produce these different manifestations in all these different organs? If you look at what exactly happens, if you divide this particular infection into larger compartments, you find that when the person develops infection, you would perhaps find that the person has fever, cough, and diarrhea as symptoms, where innate immunity is likely to play a major role. You have second stage as respiratory stage, where you are short of breath. When it comes to cytokine storm, you find that the patient lands up into ARDS, and then the person is likely to succumb. Where is the window of opportunity to treat? The window of opportunity lies between infection and respiratory phase, and that perhaps is between 5 to 7 days. And that's one understanding which we will have to have if we are going to use drugs which are anti-cytokine storm. Then perhaps you would require to think about administering them between 5 to 7 days. Whereas if there are antiviral drugs which would be available, which are effective, perhaps we may have to start as early as we can once the patient is diagnosed. Can we predict who is going to worsen? In ET, people tend to worry about this part because one needs to do all these investigations, which are costly. The number of investigations is also high. And do I need to do it very frequently? Do I need to monitor inflammatory, cardiac, renal, and hepatic, as well as immunologic markers as often among these people? Is a question which tends to vex the mind of a clinician. But there are certain simple formulae that people have published until now. One is, you go for clinical score of call, and what does call stand for? No, who is likely to worsen? Somebody who has a score of more than 6. If you have a comorbidity, you get 4 points. Call C, and then if the A stands for age, where if you are more than 60, you get 3 points. And lymphocytes and LDH, you have defined levels. When you use them, perhaps it gives you some kind of a score which can predict whether the person is likely to worsen. At the same time, there is another study which shows that baseline D-dimer level tends to influence the outcome. Now, if you actually look at the associations that they have been able to do with these D-dimer levels at baseline, you find that you are able to predict if the D-dimer levels are high, the risk of development of different organs involvement. Now, whether it comes to acute kidney injury, which is likely to be 2.4 times higher if my D-dimer level is more than 230 nanogram per ml. If it is thrombosis, the risk is likely to increase by 1.9, which may be a little lesser, but we will look at it as to how we will manage that part. And if you look at all-cause mortality, it tends to show you a dose effect. As the levels of D-dimer keep on increasing, the risk of death tends to increase if the baseline levels are above 230 nanogram, between 230 to 500 nanogram, 500 to 2000 nanogram, and anybody having 2000, more than 2000 nanograms. Immunologic signatures was one of the things which used to be a pensioner's job in medical research because it required lot of time. Most often those, if you see the Westerners, those who worked on immunologic signatures, they continue to work. They may be as old as 80. Now, that's something because you don't have successes coming too often. But the productive progeria has begun in 8 months' time. You find in COVID-19, papers have already started coming up even on immunologic signatures. The reason being the diversity tends to bother, diversity of manifestations tends to bother the scientist. There are about 10% of those who develop severe disease who develop autoantibodies. There are about 3% of them who have certain genetic mutations, and we are yet to crack the polymorphism in TLR, that is toll-like receptors, and TIMPRESS, which are TIMPRESS is another receptor which you require when the virus enters into the body. The critical patients who have autoantibodies against interferons, you find that these autoantibodies are by and large more likely to be seen among males, 5 times more often. If you are older, then the association is 1.61, which is about 1.5 times higher compared to anybody who has less than 65 years of age. Now, which essentially is also pointing out to one fact that this particular COVID infection may show a flare up of autoimmune diseases, even if you come out of this, because you might develop one since autoantibodies are likely to be seen more often among certain people. You also see that there is some impact on the genetic variants, which is actually going to influence, but there is not much of clarity. If you look at IRF, which is related to interferons, if there is polymorphism, that is likely to affect the severity that you might see. But these are still less clear aspects which should become clearer as the time passes by. So essentially, what are we speaking about? We are speaking about the different phases of disease progression and then think in terms of what interventions I would require. So you perhaps need to remember in incubation period, the person is going to be outside. He may be having he may be mild symptomatic or asymptomatic. Once he develops respiratory dyspnea, you will find that the person may be landing in pulmonary phase. Then what follows is a pro-inflammatory phase, then pro-thrombotic phase, and you will also see it down that convalescent plasma is likely to be working in the early phase of infection. If you look at antivirals, they should work across, but then we save them for use because they're not perfect as yet. Mechanical ventilation may be required once the individual lands up into ARDS. You may provide anticoagulants once the person starts developing pro-inflammatory phase so that you don't want any coagulation abnormalities leading to different manifestation, which could be neurologic or cardiac. And that's how we by and large manage. One of the best papers that I read very recently, when you have a new pandemic coming in and you don't have much of time to conduct research, you don't have standardized guidelines to treat patients, the way we react is something which is very funny to be seen. There will be some people who will be skeptical about this new evidence that tends to emerge, and they would perhaps fall into the first category, which you see in this particular graph, which can be labeled as medical nihilism. Those who don't regard any kind of research output that is coming there as important enough to take cognizance of during the outbreak. But at the same time, there is another spectrum that you will see. Those who are hawkish, anything new that they read in the papers, anything new that they read even in newspapers as something which is useful, they are likely to jump and say that I am going to use this particular drug. But the balance lies in sensible medicine. You need to ensure that you don't get drawn into either first compartment or second compartment. Otherwise, the patients are likely to suffer because of this. One of the best things that he talked about was there are 5 tenets, 5 principles of practice of sensible medicine in this particular pandemic. The first, no, I'm describing his 5 tenets. I'm adding the names of the drugs that come to my mind which fall in that category. Medicine without magic bullet, you will find that certain medicines are associated individually, or individual experiences would demand and say that they are likely to work better. But it's not a magic bullet. It works in certain subsets, if at all, or perhaps they are not as important as they sound to be. One is tocilizumab, remdesivir, and steroids, perhaps, are a magic bullet, but you need to fire that bullet at a time when you actually require. If you do that in the early stage of the disease, you are perhaps not, you are likely to ensure that the virus will grow more because I'm suppressing immune response at a wrong time when the person's immune response can fight with this infection as much. You practice doing nothing, almost nothing. That second tenet of practice of sensible medicine. Now, if you don't have any drug, these days I tend to fight with different groups. We say that you need to have some drug to provide. Otherwise, patients, they will feel that doctors are not going to do anything. But the reality of life is for us in HIV, we did not have medicines until 1994 in this country. Now, till that time, there was nothing available. So we used to practice, nothing, no, except counseling or lip service as such. But unfortunately, people have not followed this principle. If they would have had followed, they would never have had used ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine as some of the examples, because the evidence is not all that strong for the same. If you look at, elevate usual care, no, what have we learned in last so many months? You find that high flow nasal oxygen has suddenly become important and not ventilators. If you look at prone position was something which we knew for ages, but if you provide that, the outcomes tend to be better. You look at management of chronic morbidity, you don't require much. You know what you have to do. You focus at high quality evidence. That is, when you think of reading the articles, research articles, you need to prioritize. You need to say observational studies are useless, anecdotal infection is useless. You do meta-analysis and you do RCTs. Meta-analysis stands as number one in terms of evidence, and randomized control trials stand number two. And you evaluate evidence based on that rather than any any report that can actually influence your own practice. Think Bayesian. What does that essentially mean? Bayes was a big statistician. Bayesian is a statistical approach. And in Bayesian, what we do? It tends to look back and tries to review what was the outcome in the past and then take the decision for the subsequent one. We need to remember the past history of certain drugs, whether they work, they did not. And this is called as posterior odds in Bayesian statistics. We know zinc is proposed, vitamin C, D, oseltamivir. They are proposed for many different diseases. If you leave the last one, oseltamivir, zinc, vitamin C, and D have been traditionally told as some drugs which could be effective in the last 30, 40 years, wherever we did not understand anything. But you must consider posterior odds. You must remember that they failed every time when people thought that they could be really useful. And it is unlikely that the past performance is likely to change in the future or in the present. So don't trust them. So if you look at what we have done, no, if you look at therapeutic drugs, there is one thing which we must remember, that there is a very small window of opportunity since the time that you are going to get because of natural history of the disease is small enough, you will perhaps require very effective antivirals if you are going to reduce this highly transmissible infection. If you look at what we have done so far, it's a story of dropping ineffective drugs, whether it is boosted lopinavir, ivermectin, oseltamivir, favipiravir, hydroxychloroquine, tocilizumab, convalescent plasma, interferons, and now there is a question mark against remdesivir. Currently, we need to remember that it is the quality of supportive care which is number one, and steroids at a right time, they make a difference. We try to talk about certain drugs so that perhaps we don't prescribe wrong drugs to wrong people. Ivermectin is the only thing that happened was the docking and ex vivo studies, they favored use of ivermectin. However, there is one thing which we did not look at, the concentration of ivermectin in the lungs. You need 100 times more human dose if you are to have adequate level of ivermectin in the lungs. And therefore, one needs to remember there is currently no robust evidence for use of ivermectin in COVID-19 as such. And you may also find that the so-called association studies don't make so much of difference because association studies are usually with different biases which actually come out when you read the studies. When it comes to boosted lopinavir, even darunavir with cobicistat, they were also found to, they were used mainly because we know that these drugs, they work against CL-Pro, which is chymotrypsin-like protease, which is present in COVID-19, PL-Pro, that is papain-like protease, and therefore people thought that it will be able to inhibit replication as such. People, when they started working on RLPV, that is boosted lopinavir, they found there was no clinical impact. When it comes to cobicistat and darunavir, which is far more powerful as a drug compared to boosted lopinavir, there was no clinical impact. So forget about use of protease inhibitors from HIV armamentarium. When it comes to hydroxychloroquine, plus I'm sorry, this SCQ should be with azithromycin or without azithromycin in treatment, there is no clinical benefit. There is a likelihood of higher toxicity, so there is no point in using them. When it comes to tocilizumab, it's a pendulum that you tend to see. Roche, the manufacturer, they did two trials. First was Covacta trial, where they found there was no difference. So they said, it is useless. Why should I use tocilizumab? It went so much that Sanofi, which was trying to develop another monoclonal against IL-6, they dropped the idea of going ahead with the development phase. But the Impacta trial, which was done as a phase 3 trial by Roche itself, they found that it reduces the risk of use of ventilation or death by close to about 44% among patients who received tocilizumab. But there was no difference in 28 days mortality. There was no difference in infection rates because this is a monoclonal. The reason why we worry about monoclonals is it can give rise to development of secondary bacterial infections. And for us, the biggest worry is a large population of ours is having LTBI, latent tuberculosis infection, and that was a big worry. So for tocilizumab, the issue is it continues to remain as emergency use authorization, but it has not been able to transcend into recommendations ever so far. When it comes to favipiravir, this is RDRP inhibitor, a polymerase enzyme that is there. There are ex vivo studies, there are animal studies which showed that favipiravir can work well, but in animal studies, it reduced the lung viral load only in 50% of the animals. Then when people did meta-analysis of this particular study, they realized that there is no difference in oxygen requirement or viral clearance, but it may improve some clinical and radiological improvement may also be seen. But you need to use higher dosages. So favipiravir continues to remain into experimental mode so far. Uminofinivir, Fenovir, and favipiravir. These two drugs were combined by Glenmark, and so far this is unpublished data, but they themselves have come out in the news saying that use of two drugs was not associated with significant difference in outcomes, and therefore use of favipiravir is still a question mark which we need to think about at this juncture. But use of steroids, classically recovery trial tended to show the benefits that you would have. If you think in terms of mechanical ventilation, the risk was reduced by 36%. When you look at all-cause mortality, that was also reduced by 25%. When it comes to duration of mechanical ventilation, even if the patient went on ventilator, it was reduced closely by 5 days. You need to give dexamethasone 6 milligram per day for 10 days only. Now, the reason why I'm saying is today what I'm seeing is people tend to give dexa for a long period of time. That is not required. And what is also important, we should ensure that we don't start it early, and dexa should be preferred, should be given, not be given to those who are not needing oxygen. And the dosages of other formulations are also very clear, which are equivalent, but the dosages may vary, frequency of administration may vary by their half-life. When it comes to remdesivir and COVID-19, you found that initial reports were that 5 days treatment would be sufficient enough. But when you think of WHO's recent trial, it tended to show that it is ineffective. Now, still nobody has taken a strong position on the same because there would continue to be questions that would be asked. This is a effectiveness study. When it comes to effectiveness, people may start this drug at right or wrong time, and perhaps it may influence the findings. We would never know. And therefore, we don't know whether effectiveness studies finding should be used to say that remdesivir is not likely to be useful when some small benefits tend to accrue with remdesivir. But this debate will continue for some time. If you look at convalescent plasma, another fashion that you are seeing, the Mayo study and ICMR trial showed that it is not of any use. It should not be used as standard of care, is a position that US FDA has taken. We will need to wait for additional robust evidences. But at the same time, a newer finding has come that it tends to reduce the risk of death by close to about 66% among people if you are giving it in less than severely ill patients. So earlier, if you provide this convalescent plasma, it may be beneficial, but the final call will have to be taken after different study results that may come. Will an effective drug become available? No, we need to remember that currently we are working in repurposed molecules. I still recall my background is HIV. It took almost 5 years to find out zidovudine as a drug which was effective once after the discovery of the first cases. But it led to one drug found to be effective. It led to a revolution. You have no other viral disease where you have so many drugs available for its treatment as in HIV. The story is similar in hepatitis C. HIV drugs, lamivudine and tenofovir were used against hepatitis C, and we found that it made so much of revolution that today you have large number of drugs available, and we think of it being an elimination disease as well. We are very smart people. We have to trust our scientists. We anticipate well. We discovered a drug against smallpox, tecovirimat, in 2018 when smallpox was eradicated in 1972 because there was a fear of bioterrorism. Some kind of lead has to come, things would be different. Is this monoclonal which was used in Trump's case as such, is that going to make a difference? We will have to see. But when you think of monoclonals, we need to remember that escape mutants are always likely to develop, and this is an outbreak where you might lead to development of monoclonal resistant viruses as an outcome against if the outbreak is very severe and going up, the number of cases goes up all over. If you look at different drug classes that are being studied, there are large number of drug classes that are being studied. If you look at the number of compounds, you find people are focusing more on monoclonal antibodies, immunostimulatory drugs against polyclonal entries, and then helicase. And then there are large number of clinical studies that are going on. Now, some people will feel, can I describe them? I would not. Because the reason is, one thing which we learned, that even emergency use authorization that was conferred during development of the guidelines, treatment guidelines, it was confused and people took it as standard of care kind of a guideline. And that's something which is a very bad thing to happen. Neither hydroxychloroquine, which was actually used right and left earlier by people, was never discussed as a recommendation, but it was a researchable issue that was identified. Unfortunately, it spilled over. So there is no point in discussing which drugs are being tried in human clinical trials, because we may possibly end up using them without having a stronger evidence. There are certain things which we have to remember. Pregnant women are likely to have a severe disease. The reasons are multiple. The lung volume is reduced. There is a cardiovascular stress. These women are likely to clot. And that's the reason why you tend to provide anticoagulants to them if they develop COVID over 10 days after delivery. And then overweight pregnant women and those with diabetes are at a higher risk, and they may also have H1N1 infection. These women are likely to develop venous thromboembolism. That's why you use a drug like enoxaparin to try and ensure that this doesn't happen during delivery and even 10 days post delivery. When it comes to pregnancy outcomes, you find that the pregnancy outcomes, there are small associations, infrequent associations that occur for pregnancy loss, stillbirth, neonatal death, and premature delivery as also an outcome of the pregnancy. Is there a mother to child transmission? There are only sporadic cases that have been reported, but as of now, we don't think mother to child transmission does occur. Is the mode of delivery associated with risk of transmission? There is no evidence as yet. Neither COVID-19 has been reported to be teratogenic so far. The data from pregnancy registry that has been collected so far tends to tell you that it is not teratogenic. Perhaps favipiravir is likely to be teratogenic. Is it transmitted through breast milk? No. But since this is a respiratory infection, a strict practice of non-pharmacological interventions is vital during breastfeeding. In the reason why we are discussing pregnancy as such, in the children, if they develop this, acquire this COVID-19, in those circumstances, a small proportion, it's a rare thing, it's like Kawasaki syndrome, may develop pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, which can have potentially damaging effect long-term as well as on survival of these children. Now, this infection is a peculiar infection. Now, even if it doesn't cause, let's say, death or severe organ damage as such, people have started realizing that 35% of these people who acquire this infection are likely to become persisters or long haulers, as people say. Who are these people who may still have some kind of problem after this infection? You find those who are older than 50 years, those who have more than 3 chronic morbidities, those whose BMI, that is, if they are obese, those who have psychiatric conditions, they may become persisters as such. You find almost 90% of the people will have persistent symptoms after infection. Most often it is fatigue or dyspnea, and that's something which we have to keep at the back of mind. And these observations tend to continue even beyond 60 days after getting the infection. Now, why people become long haulers? They become long haulers because perhaps there may be unmasking of underlying comorbidity. There is a residual damage from acute infection. One of the most dreaded one is lung fibrosis, because we still don't know whether the antifibrotic drugs that we use will work against them, persistent or restricted viral replication, and also which in turn talks about poor immune response, persistent immune activation, which is not a good thing to happen because people tend to have shorter life if they tend to have this persistent immune activation, and post-traumatic stress disease, which to my mind, if you ask me, is a better etiopathogenic issue which can always be handled clinically. What do you need if somebody who's infected after the COVID episode? What do you tell them? Most often it depends on different symptoms that they come with, but what works best is breathing exercises like pranayam and basrika, and you find exercise is good for them, which reduce a lot of debility that might come due to it. And what is also important, those who enter into receiving enoxaparin, you must remember that thromboprophylaxis may have to continue 10 days post discharge in order to reduce the risk, because you hear of different cases where even a young person develops myocardial infarction and succumbs to it because we didn't provide enoxaparin. Now we look at prevention to end with. Now, one of the things which we have to remember, it's a difficult disease to handle. As I said, 2 days prior to development of symptom, 41% of the transmissions that occur will occur. After 2 days of development of symptom, you will find another 35% are added. And between 3 and 10 days, 24% of infections will be transmitted, which essentially means if you look at our turnaround times, you will find 76% of the transmissions are difficult to be handled. People will have to use the infection prevention methods in all the time if we want to actually reduce this frequency. What is important also to understand that it's not that all people who are infected are going to transmit. 80% of new infections tend to come from only 20% of these cases. Is there any data from India? One of the data that has come confirms that there is no secondary transmission from 71% of the individuals. It's a very large study and a beautifully done study. If you look at secondary infection probability, it will depend on type of at-risk contacts, and it will vary accordingly. But what is most important is same age contacts tend to have higher risk, which may be actually telling us the type of social network that we have. And at the same time, we also realize that the death rates, our risk of death is falling by as the time is passing by. And that's a redeeming feature that we have to keep at the back of mind. The later I diagnose this particular infection in people, the larger is the risk of passing it to more number of individuals from others, which is not something which is a really out of box kind of a thinking. But what it is telling is these infections which are transmitted are likely to be more in number, especially in social events and when one goes out for work. Why is this important? Because now we are starting a period of festivities, and the social events could actually become super spreader events as such. And that is classically shown in one of the studies, which tends to show that if large number of people stay in a setting where ventilation is poor, the risk of transmission tends to be very high. And then it poses a huge issue in terms of finding out, going for contact tracing as such. So what is the solution? Universal masking. Now, if you go for universal masking, perhaps you will have 50% less transmissions and a third of deaths due to COVID-19 by February 2021. If you look at how we are performing, you will find in India's map, we are performing really well in terms of always use of mask. But then why the numbers are increasing? It tends to tell you that there is improper use. We may be lowering mask during talking. So you need to engage community if you want to make a difference. Essentially, we are talking of only non-pharmacologic age-old interventions as one of the strategies which we need to follow. We did lockdown, but lockdown is a balance between health outcomes and economic outcomes. What we learned overall is if we have to ensure, we need to have a calibrated approach so that health outcomes and economic impact are minimal as much as possible. Even if one has COVID 19, one must continue to follow the COVID appropriate behavior, otherwise, one is likely to be a persister, or one may acquire reinfection, which has been classically shown in 5 individuals so far. The risk of reinfection, though it is very low, the only good part of it is that it is not known to transmit infections to others, but you need to prevent them. Will it impact herd immunity? Probably we don't know. Herd immunity is also vaccine induced immunity. There are close to about 180 groups which are developing vaccine. 26 people, 26 agencies are currently in human trials. So if you think about vaccines, these are the different vaccine platforms that we are using as of now. Most of them have not been used so far in public health. If you hear more about adenovirus vector, now adenovirus is a common infection and you might have an antibody against adenoviruses. We don't know whether it affects the take of vaccine. If you have two different strains of adenovirus, maybe that may not affect the immunity as much. The take might be better. So there might be some advantage to Sputnik vaccine, if at all, which uses two different formulations. It also has an additional advantage that it is lyophilized vaccine as well. So you won't require the refrigeration and you could still use it, which will reduce the scale up problems as such. What to my mind is most important is the nasal vaccine that is being developed by Bharat Biotech as well as Serum Institute now. They are going to go for testing because it evokes mucosal immunity. If you don't evoke mucosal immunity, the protection is unlikely to last longer for the simple reason that you need IgA primed well to protect yourself. Now, what is important is there are people who also feel that vaccine induced protection may be overestimated in these trials. It's very difficult to say at this time, but they have a valid reason to talk about it over a period of time. There is some amount of uncertainty. What would be the frequency of use of these vaccines? Because we don't know how long this immune protection will last. The key issue that we need to remember that globally we can produce 2.5 billion vaccine dosages per year. So you can immunize 125 crore people. So you may have to prioritize people. And then there are issues of uptake of vaccine, which we have to think about. If you look.
Oh my God. Probably his internet connection has gone and he has disappeared from that. But it was a really very informative talk. And before we'll wait for, I'll just probably telephone him and ask him whether his internet connection has gone, or probably he may join again, because he was telling constantly that his internet may go anytime. He was passing through a very hard time. It was a really very nice lecture, and if, what Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar was telling about the universal masking and all these. So that has given us a sense that Corona has shown us many faces, has unmasked many faces. Corona has practically unmasked many faces of life, and it has shown that how uncaring, how dismissive we can be towards our society people. We can be towards our colleagues or relatives. Even dead bodies, they were being they had to face the music of Corona, which we all know about it. And we broke the trust of humanity just based on the fear by the. But these warriors, which we will be taking, these warriors, they were not afraid of these things. They were still working on the field, and there's a they were even a better warrior than these army people. Army person has to care about only one bullet which he has to face on his chest. But these warriors, they if they go to their home and they spread the infection, their whole family can affair. So we have got in this today in our family in this Karamveer special, this thing. Can we have the right, which is the second one? Right, this one. Right. This we had talked about that, and we had 10 people over here. First of all, is somebody else? अरे तुम इसको वो कर रहे हो क्या जेवी? इसको छेड़ रहा है क्या? नहीं, आगे नहीं चल रहा भाई ये तेरा इसमें कुछ कर. Are you man or what? हाँ, हाँ. Yes, am I audible now? Sorry for the little technical glitches. This thing, and we have got with us Dr. Nitya Vyas, who is a professor and head of microbiology department, SMS Medical College. Will Dr. Veena Acharya will introduce her?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. Good evening. And first of all, I would like to welcome our guest of today's guest of honor, Dr. V.M. Katoch, and our guest speaker, Dr. Ganga Khedkar Padamshri. I'm thankful to them for sparing their valuable time for enlightening us. Before introducing Dr. Nitya Vyas, Dr. Nitya Vyas is well-known figure in Jaipur and Rajasthan, and she is very senior professor in SMS Medical College and the head of department of microbiology. She attached to the SMS Medical College since 1982. Dr. Nitya Vyas is a well-known figure and she is sparing her time. She is especially always attached and worked a lot in the all epidemic, HIV, AIDS, and other, and especially today in the corona pandemics. She is a basic researcher, academician, and very hardworking. And she is have a lot of publication in her credit. Dr. Nitya Vyas, and I must appreciate her for her working day in day out for the corona, for the patient benefits. And one thing I just want to share, she is my sister-in-law, and we all family members is proud of her. Nitya Vyas, please.
Dr. Nitya Vyas, can you listen to us?
Nitya, Dr. Nitya Vyas.
Because I just now received that she had to leave the meeting and went to the hospital or some.
And she's day in day out busy in hospital. And
But
really
anyway,
we had suffered.
Dr. Nitya, are you? Can you listen to us?
She will join later on.
All right. Doesn't matter. अरे भाई जयवीर.
Introduce next one.
हाँ एक मिनट. Yes. So now we have got Dr. Puneet Rijwani. Dr. Puneet Rijwani is professor and head department of medicine at Mahatma Gandhi Medical College and Hospital. He is MD and FICP, FRCP from England. And Dr. Puneet, can you listen us? Dr.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So welcome, Dr. Puneet, and we are lucky to have you today with us. How do let us quickly recapitulate what are your current clinical experience and how do you treat patients in non-ICU settings?
Actually, sir, we have treated almost more than 1,500 people. But the severity of illness has decreased. What we are seeing since last 7 to 10 days, fortunately, less number of patients are coming and the severity has also decreased. earlier most of our patients had to be put on oxygen therapy. Even in general wards, they were on oxygen 10 to 15 liters. But nowadays, most of the patients are mildly symptomatic and less number of patients are to be shifted to ICUs, sir. We are using almost every drug that is available, right from favipiravir to remdesivir, steroids, and even tocilizumab. One new drug which we are using in few patients is ulinastatin, sir. It is also, we have seen there is clinical benefit with ulinastatin that is not recommended in any of the protocols. Only few centers have been using this. But yes, we have seen clinical benefit with ulinastatin. Talking about plasma therapy, the guidelines, ICMR guidelines, PLACID trial has outlined this management. But yes, if it is used at right time, given to the patient in the initial part of illness, then yes, we have seen few patients who have remarkable improvement with this therapy, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is Dr. Alok Mathur here? Dr. Alok? Hello? Dr. Alok Mathur? He's also not. Hello? Are you, have you? Hello? All right. Let us see. Now we come to Dr. Jaswant Goel. And Dr. Jaswant Goel is MD and is the Chief Advisor of Medical Sciences, JNU Medical College and Hospital. And he's basically a clinical pharmacologist, JNU Hospital. He's a COVID Treatment Center Founder Secretary and he's Medical Research Society, Rajasthan. He has got 14 years of experience in the healthcare, particularly in teaching, training, and research in the clinical pharmacology. I request people not to misuse the whiteboard. That gives me a unnecessary this thing. Just a moment. Javier, either ये इसको मैं करता हूँ उसको annotate. People are trying whiteboard. Right. So, Dr. Jaswant Goel, I remember that you suffered from yourself from corona and during caregiving. And no one must have given you a 21 salute. No state of honor you must have got it. But no medical movies have been made for you. No books must have been written for you. But still, you are working. And you are working at the maximum what I can see in the JNU Medical College by looking after that. But you must be getting prayers from your patients. You must be getting good thanks notes from your patients. And that is probably what. So, what is your take on antiviral therapy and remdesivir, and how do you treat? Can you share your experiences over here in a quick time, Dr. Jaswant Goel?
Yes, sir. Sir, first of all, thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, very much.
Yeah, giving me this opportunity, and especially when my Guruji, Dr. Viren Singh ji, is there as chairperson, and Dr. VM Katoch as guest of honor. Dr. Veena Acharya, madam, thank you so much, all of you. And first of all, I would like to say that certainly I got encountered with COVID-19, and it might be because of my frequent visits in the COVID center, because I am visiting COVID center inside every day around, spending 4 to 5 hours there with the patients since beginning of the COVID treatment center in JNU. And would cut short my point. I just want to request about my screen share of my just 3 slides of PPT.
Sure. You
yeah.
Javier, can you?
I'm just trying.
You try. No issue. हाँ नहीं वो कर लेंगे अपने आप. सब इसमें वो है ना screen sharing का. Yes, we can see.
So it's all right?
Oh, yes, we can see.
So just few slides, because it is a COVID treatment center, JNU. So I would just like to convey about what we are doing, how we are doing, and what we have achieved till date. Right, sir?
Yes.
So it is a COVID treatment center reception entrance area.
Your screen is not moving. Your slides are not moving. Your
Slide,
slides
sir.
are not moving.
I think it's moving now.
No, no.
Wait a minute.
David, can you?
I am on the first slide of where?
No, you are on your this desktop.
Just give me another chance, sir. Just give me
On
another chance.
On mail.
Let me try.
Huh? हाँ, 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 last. हाँ, हो जाए. I am doing it. Just a moment. Give me time.
Okay.
वो देखो. हाँ, stop. एक मिनट. Can you stop sharing your screen? हाँ, yes.
I stopped it. Just let me try it again, sir. I think it's now. Is it visible now?
Oh yes, now it is visible. Yes. Now it is visible.
So it's the complete share. Fine. So is it moving, sir?
Yes, now it is moving.
Yeah. So I just would like to convey our clinical approach, what we are doing right now. So we are actually conveying people, motivating them to come early. So in the first week, the target is reducing viremia by using various antiviral drugs like remdesivir. We are relying on remdesivir very much, and other therapies like plasma therapy. And the target also targeting the reducing inflammation, coagulation abnormalities, secondary bacterial infection, etc. So these are the targets of first week, and then in the second week and third week, we are targeting to anticipating early sign of cytokine storm, secondary bacterial infection, pulmonary fibrosis, and treat them aggressively. So this is a clinical approach, starting motivating people to come early, targeting first week, second week, and the key is early remdesivir, long-term LMWH, steroid and antibiotic support, and timely therapy, plasma therapy, and tocilizumab. So these are our USP. And how we are delivering it, it is a teamwork. We have critical care, medicine, pulmonary medicine, clinical pharmacology, psychiatry, physiotherapy, and dietetics support with us. And clinical decisions are supported by a data management team as well as research team. Super specialty support is there. Our super specialists are also visiting inside the COVID area. That is one of the best part. So cardiology, urology, nephrology, oncology, neurosurgery, people are giving support. And another thing is 24/7 on-floor support. So senior resident is always available on floor in PPE all the time. 1:20 cases, 20 cases, one senior resident. On 10 cases, one junior resident. Nursing team leader 10:1, and nursing staff according to the severity and requirement on the area, ICU, general ward, isolation areas, and rooms, depending on that. And we are also giving shorter duty hours, and proper handing over is also being ensured. So this is what we are doing right now. And what we have achieved around 96% survival. Specifically, the mortality is there in the cases presented with the severe pneumonitis, and patient presented with mild to moderate pneumonitis. With all these approaches, we are getting almost 100% survival rates. And there are very much comorbidities also. And we are treating them properly. We got treated around more than 90 years patient, pregnant women, patients with CKD, diabetes, obesity, Parkinson's disease, kidney transplant patients, and the first post-op day CABG patient, 2 CABG patients were also treated by this method, and they got discharged properly with some sequel, without sequel. Ultimately, there is good survival rate. So we are facing some challenges. We would like to have reply of few things like, patients presented with chronic liver disease. So specifically, we are not able to give them remdesivir. We are not able to give them tocilizumab at that point of time. So it is always a matter of debate whether to give tocilizumab, remdesivir, etc. in condition of chronic liver disease. Secondly, impending lung fibrosis. Dealing with impending lung fibrosis is very, very difficult. Whether to continue with long-term steroid therapy, at what doses, and how much to continue. And ultimately, results are not so encouraging, particularly impending lung fibrosis. I would also like to understand with the chair and the team that effectiveness of pulse therapy in early phases of severe patients presented with the severe lung pneumonitis. So the high doses of pulse therapy with steroid. And we are also having challenges with insulin resistant blood sugar, sometimes the 400 plus blood sugar patients are kept on, insulin infusion for about 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and it's still very difficult to control their blood sugar levels. And another challenge is counseling of attendants and their families, because treating inside, going outside, counsel them, communicating with them is very, very difficult task. So these are all the challenges, what we are doing, how we are doing, and what kind of challenges we are facing in GNU, and what we have achieved till date. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Jaswant, for the nice brief workout. Can you stop sharing so that we can?
Sure. I'm just trying it.
Yeah.
So yeah, did it.
Right. जयवीर वो लगा वो यही था ना सेकंड. Our next speaker is Dr. Raghav Shah, who is Dr. Raghav Shah, who is DM in Addiction Psychiatry from PGI Chandigarh. He is the Director and Consultant in Psychiatry and De-Addiction of Rajasthan Hospital, Jaipur. Dr. Raghav, are you here on the board?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you see me and hear me?
We all know the stress of corona, fear, and outside the houses and on the roads, but that is not there in the doctors and nurses, which, as Dr. Jaswant was telling, here in the JNU and in Rajasthan Hospital and wherever I have been able to talk, the doctors and nurses, they are all working fearlessly. So can you give us some tips on the to relieve the corona fear from the houses?
Sir, so I'll be very brief, and what I would say is that there are two broad categories of people. One who have contracted corona, and then they fear about the problems, about their treatment, about post-COVID complications. This is a small number. A large number is persons who have not had corona, and thankfully so, but they are in knowledge.
They are more worried. They are more worried.
Yeah, they're extremely worried, and especially those who have come in contact or who have close friends, family members who have had COVID. So this group is the biggest group which needs to be focused in terms of reducing their fear. And to reduce fear, the most important thing is to send out messages which are brief. People can take home something out of those messages, and then they can implement it and understand that whether their symptoms are suggestive of corona or not. Because what we are seeing is a huge number of people who are just wanting to see doctors, getting themselves investigated because of fear. And as we know that fear is a part of overall anxiety, where psychological symptom of fear is associated with a lot of physical symptoms of tachycardia, difficulty in breathing, sometimes even difficulty in balance, people feeling that they have some heart or lung condition. So this fear is unjustified, but understandable in terms of so much of information that is out there. So if we can put out some pulses of focused information for people, and of course we should emphasize that a lot of mental health complications are increasing, so that people at least know that they have a possibility of some mental health issue, maybe anxiety or depression. So that's how I think we can counter the fear of COVID, and of course with the support of all the wonderful doctors doing our work. So thank you from my side.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raghav. Now,
thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot for these tips. And then comes Dr. Puneet Gupta. He's a consultant in Rukmani Birla Hospital. Dr. Puneet, are you there? Or because I received some message just now that he has to leave for some emergency. Now comes Dr. R.K. Porwal, who is a consultant in infectious diseases, and he's working for the Manipal Hospital. He's a very famous man in the infectious disease specialty. Dr. Porwal, are you here? Dr. Ravikant? He was there. Hello? Dr. Ravikant? Am I audible or not? Hello?
You're audible.
All right. Thank you. Is Dr. Ravikant here? He joined it, but I do not know, because people working in the infectious diseases and all these, you never know it when they get a emergency. Because I saw him. Dr. Ravikant Porwal? No. Then comes Dr. Pankaj Verma. Dr. Pankaj Verma is a typical man who is a MD medicine and is MBBS from All India Institute, MD from PGIM Chandigarh, and fellowship in diabetes from UK. Then in rheumatology from USA, masters in physiotherapy, psychotherapy and counseling, but he still prefers to act on the holistic approach using Ayurvedic, homeopathic and whatnot. So Dr. Pankaj is a young, budding, young and very daring physician working for the Rajasthan Hospital. Pankaj, are you here?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Come on. Then you tell us that how do you investigate the patients who are suspected corona patients, and what is your holistic approach on role of Ayush? Because role of steroids, I thought I will ask you, but role of diet also you can tell us.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone.
You're audible. Please.
Hello.
Please mute, other people should mute, otherwise.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, as Dr. Mathur said, we are seeing lots of patients nowadays, and from my experience in the OPD, I always advise patients to come early as soon as possible, because there are some subtle markers in the blood investigation which can actually pick up very early the coronavirus infection. I advise every patient to go for the complete blood count and to look for ESR, to look for C-reactive protein, and to look for initially their liver function and their kidney function, just to rule out any impact on the major organs. And then the subtle markers are the ESR is very, very high, especially in this case. So you can pick up very early. As you all know, in the initial days of viremia, first 3 days reports may be normal, but we have to repeat the infection after 3rd day or 5th day or 7th day, depending on the patient condition and the criticality. And ESR is very high. CRP, as you all know, this is the unique in the time of medical history. Like we all used to differentiate CRP. By doing CRP, we tell whether it is viral or bacterial. But yes, this is the coronavirus who is actually raising CRP very, very high, totally diluting the boundary between bacterial and infectious and viral diseases. So yes, CRP is very high if there is cytokine storm. And initially, I also rely on the neutrophil count and the lymphocyte count. As Dr. Raman has also said, so the low lymphocyte count is and the ratio of neutrophil and lymphocyte, if it is more than 3.5 or more than 4, then it is a marker of severe infection. So you can pick up even on the day 2 or day 3 which patient gonna worsen over the coming week, and you can treat them accordingly. So these are some investigation which can actually help very, very which are very cheap and not of and easily available also. Regarding the other investigation, D-dimer and IL-6 and serum ferritin, yes, that should be done. If if the patient having severe symptoms, if the patient is having very high CRP, then I advise them to go for the other expensive investigations, and then we can decide whether the patient should be treated on the home care basis or whether we need to admit the patient for the proper management. And these are the parts of investigation. Regarding the diet, since I follow the holistic medicine, as we all know, the patient diet should be very, very easy, as easily digestible as possible. Because if we get heavy food, it may impact the viremia, it may impact the severity also. So I advise patients to take most of the patients to take liquid diet or semi-solid diet, and to take them more of ORS, since because of fever there is a severe water loss and due to evaporation. So I advise them to take electrolyte solution powder, and along with the simple, we take shikanji or dal water or rice water or any water with salt is sufficient. Another thing is the role of Ayush. Since Dr. Raman has already tell in detail what allopathic drugs are and the use, whether effective or not effective. That's a different thing. In the Ayurveda is also effective. There are some research trial going on in the ICMR also, and the research, the CGIR in the Delhi, and the Tulsi, Ashwagandha, Mulethi. These are the things which actually found effective, and right now and under trial, so we can use them also. And homeopathy also have very effective role. I'm using in my patients, which great effectiveness. There is no single drug which we can label. Yes, this can be given. It's not like allopathy, but depending on the patient of symptom, if somebody having severe fever, medicine is different. Somebody having severe cough, medicine is different. And if we apply them and combine them along with allopathy and the diet, it will having a great response. Regarding the role of steroids, as Dr. Raman has said, we should use them judiciously and more appropriately in the second week. That would be better. Steroids is actually having very great response, especially if patients coming with severe cough, any patient who having saturation less than 92%. So definitely steroids has to be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pankaj. Now I call upon Dr. Madhur Joshi. Madhur is a very young physician and who is a pulmonologist, and is Madhur. Can you tell us about the role of non-invasive ventilation in severe COVID pneumonias, because you are working mainly on the COVID pneumonias?
A very good evening to all of you. I hope I'm audible to all.
Very much audible.
Yeah, very much.
Okay. So non-invasive ventilation has played a very important role as far as COVID patients are concerned. We all know, as Dr. Raman Kangakhedkar has already told us, that there is a picture of severe ARDS. Pathology also includes vascular dilatation and thrombotic events. We don't have as much evidence from our country as of now, but Western world, from Italy, there is some evidence where they have performed autopsy cases, and they have shown that there is significant thrombotic events in lungs and other vascular structures of our body, especially COVID-19 patients. So non-invasive ventilation comprises of two important things. One is a BiPAP or a CPAP machine. Now, the difference is simply that a CPAP is a single level and a bi-level mode has got two different modes. Now, the mechanism, what we usually use is that in CPAP, we provide PEEP, and in bi-level also, there is only role of PEEP, which is positive end expiratory pressures. Now, how to select these patients? Yes, definitely there is an evidence of ARDS in these patients. Usually in mild ARDS, as far as burden definition is concerned, if we consider a bi-level machine or a CPAP machine or any other mode of non-invasive ventilation earlier, there is significant improvement as far as oxygenation is concerned. Okay, so the major advantage is that you save a person landing up on an invasive mechanical ventilation mode, which has got significant side effects. You have secondary bacterial infections. So that there comes the role of non-invasive ventilation. So one is non-invasive ventilation, BiPAP or a CPAP mode. We use PEEP. Now, another thing which Dr. Sharad Gangakhedkar has already mentioned is the use of high flow nasal cannula. Now, high flow nasal cannula has got a significant role. Okay, the mechanism by which it is supporting these COVID patients is that it provides heated and humidified oxygenation. There is significant inspiratory demand in these patients. So it acts better than a non-rebreathing mask. It increases the functional residual capacity. There is a provision of PEEP also in high flow nasal cannula. Now, how do you estimate a PEEP in a high flow nasal cannula? So there is a rough estimate that with the flow of every 10 liters per minute of oxygenation, there is a delivery of 1 centimeter of water of PEEP. Okay, so now you can provide oxygen in a better way than a simple nasal prong or an oxygen mask or a non-rebreathing mask through high flow nasal cannula. So these are the two major non-invasive ventilation which we are using in our critical patients. But yes, timing is very important. Timing is very important. You need to have, you need to use this when you have a picture of mild ARDS as per Berlin definitions. Definitely, if a patient goes to moderate and severe ARDS, you are not justified to use these non-invasive ventilation modes. You have to switch to invasive ventilation. But if used earlier and if used on time, you can definitely save these patients from landing upon invasive ventilation, where we know that the outcome is poorer if a patient lands upon an invasive mechanical ventilation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Madhur. And finally, we have got, again, it's not moving. Dr. Rishabh Bansal. This is not moving. What has happened? All right. Javeer, it's not moving. Slide नहीं move कर रही है. Huh? Huh? Dr. Rishabh Bansal is a MBBS from All India Institute of Medical Sciences and MD from and also MD from geriatric medicine. So probably, what has happened? He's a consultant, is a typical consultant in geriatric medicine, although he's a very young person, but looks after all the geriatric people. Rishabh, are you there on the board? Rishabh? He's also lost contact. Rishabh? Anyway, thank you very much. And and I now I request, just a moment, the chairpersons and our Dr. VM Katoch, the guest of honor, to please give his expert comments and winding up of these things, so that, and after that we'll have take up some questions. People are remain there.
पहले मेरे साथ मैं आऊंगा या डॉक्टर चेयरपर्सन आएंगे?
नहीं सर, पहले आप ही आएंगे सर, आप ही आएंगे क्यों?
Thank you.
And your version will be final, sir.
नहीं ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, because I can't be an expert on something which I am not the expert. So, but I am basically a commentator on the aspect.
Right.
पहले तो डॉक्टर साहब, I must thank you actually for this invitation, because आप और डॉक्टर बीना हमारी किरण की सीनियर हैं, तो आप मेरे भी सीनियर हैं. So I respect that. I respect that. और इतने सालों की अफेक्शन है. और जो चेयरपर्सन डॉक्टर एन.के. माथुर साहब के साथ भी वैसी रिलेशनशिप रही है हमारी, वीरेंद्र सिंह जी के साथ भी ऐसी रही है. So I think it's a pleasure to be with you people this evening. You see, the first part is actually Dr. Raman Kankatkar's presentation. He really covered almost everything, which is the trend, which is the current trend. And Dr. Kankatcar has been, part of that initial core group of the ICMR, which spearheaded the transformation from where there was no knowledge existing, knowledge started happening, emerging from the outside the world, outside the India. Most of the information came from the Chinese studies, came from the American studies, came from the European studies. And that was translated into action in India. And in addition, the very massive upscaling of the facilities, by virtue of which we can monitor the people, we can see slow the spread of the disease. You see, India is a success story. It's no way a failure story so far. And the very initial success came by virtue of the action on the part of the civil administration, the civil service, the police. Then that went to the medical people and the public health people. So that's how the entire program emerged, and everybody excelled actually. The state governments excelled, the central government excelled in giving the information, upskilling the facilities. But the best part, when you listen to the panelists today, this is the emerging clinical experience here, the confidence of the clinicians here. These clinicians used to treat acute respiratory distress syndrome due to something else actually. So they translated the same information to corona actually. So they had experience of treating other thromboembolic disorders, so they translated the same experience to corona actually. I think that has made a difference. So initial high mortality has come down by virtue of, basically the emerging clinical experience. And that you see from the city of Jaipur itself, the SMS story, that the number of people who talked today, right from the JNU to Birla to Rajasthan Hospital, everybody, they had the experience actually to tell. This emerging experience is very valuable. What Dr. Ganga Khetkar talked about, there are general principles on the very highly impact factor published papers. But, that may not be true everywhere actually. See, what you are telling, they are also changing their version, because why they are changing their version, the new evidence is coming. And in fact, this is the heterogeneity in the patients. Which stage, exactly which stage, what is the to which infection the patient was exposed in his previous life. So that severity, that response, so that all is emerging now actually. And that way, some drugs may work actually, the very, very initial stages in a particular population, may not work elsewhere. So to reject everything or to accept everything blindly, I think is not correct. But he showed a very good graph. You should not be cynic. You should not be totally a pusher actually. So a balanced approach of what the clinicians today talked about, I think that's the right way. But more important is that, Indian experience. Now you should be all the people, like, you have decided the 50th webinar here. Next could be, looking at the Indian evidence on a particular drug or Indian evidence on a particular other story. So I think that will become very, very, very important, Professor Mathur, for the future of evolution, because this disease is going to stay with us. The corona is not going to wish away. This will be a part of us, also us who survive for a couple of more years, or may not be even few days also, we don't know. But other people who have to live a life. So this will be there, and this will leave the long-term residual defects. That's the second part which I would like to highlight actually. First, analyze the emerging experience, reanalyze that what happens in our settings, and then precisely find indication where to use something and not to use something. So that will be all fine-tuning of the Indian scenario, which our clinical people are fairly strong in the clinical judgments, but then they are not so strong in analyzing the science part, because they don't sit together. But this is the one opportunity to sit here actually, sit together, share, and then see this exactly happens, and then come out with their own guidance and publish. I think this is the second point I wanted to make. The third point, was actually the measures have to be permanent. This disease will be affecting the clinical practice. You won't be having your clinics the way you used to have earlier, because this is infective potential will be there for a long time to come. So I think, all of us are really not trained how to air handling has to be there. We are not really trained how the aseptic precautions are to be taken, because we just ignored under the antibiotic coverage story for years together. We have ignored everything. And now this has brought us back, that those procedures are very important. I remember, that when that time Kiran was a student and Professor P.K. Sethi was the boss there, and then in the Santokha Durlabhji Hospital also. And the type of discipline those surgeons used to have. So they were not the surgeons covered by antibiotics. They were not a surgeon, they were covered by the practice. They belong to the same Shushrutas period, that asepsis, and I've seen the same happening with the MC Mishra in AIMS actually. Trauma center had the lowest infections just by discipline only. So I think, that here your clinics, homes, the workplaces, the air handling and the procedures have to be very well defined, and not from borrowed knowledge. People have to improvise themselves actually, what works in their room, what works there in their settings. Whether a particle sterilization, the method, the UV light works, or other type of a light, some other new method works. So that information has to be done. It has to be, you have to learn yourself. And these, like a medical college is working here in this setup, other places, they have to generate knowledge also. Does it really work? Doesn't work. So they generate publicly useful knowledge, and the people who are users, they use that judiciously. That's the third point I wanted to make, because that will take us through a different society, a society which is conscious of maintaining the proper discipline, which we were chaotic 6 months back, 8 months back. But today India is a very fairly civilized country actually. So you can be more civilized. You can continue to be civilized as the time moves actually, and that will have an impact on other diseases. The next point is, that's some more things are really not looked at. Like a Mycobacterium W, our Indian vaccine, the Professor Talwar's vaccine. Now that has shown a very good effect in the septic shock actually. So that is in fact that is a Septobac is now licensed there actually. So same in the cytokine storms. This has shown a very good effect in the preliminary in PGI Chandigarh, AIIMS, and other places. Is undergoing trial. So you should keep our mind open that in the severe cases, beside the immunomodulator we talked about, immunosuppressive we talked about, the positive kind of immunomodulation, which these vaccines can have, may make a difference in a section of cases. So I think people should closely watch out the results of the new trial jointly funded by CSIR and DBT. So people should look at that. The last point which I wanted to make, there was a colleague who talked about the holistic medicine, and nicely Allopath talked about that. Because recently, I'm the chairman of the interdisciplinary committee of the Ministry of Ayush and other the Ministry of Science and Technology also, which looked at the alternatives, like the Chinese medicine came very fast in the very first recommendations. But Indians were nowhere there because because of our own mindset issue. Even now the IMA was opposing, other people were opposing when these recommendations have come. So my committee looked at the evidences available actually, pure evidences, and there are the evidences from the 8th century onwards on the Ayurvedic formulations, which can have an effect in the acute respiratory distress like syndrome. Since 8th century, there is nothing new actually. And in the recent past also. And those have been tried in a lakhs of individuals. Some have been tried in the early cases, like in the police people exposed, or even they were used in the other healthcare professionals, and even the clinical cases also. There are two niche, where the people can consider them. One is the post-COVID syndrome, where the effects are already visible, they're in the lungs, in the whole body, and beyond that. And that, drugs like ashwagandha have a very big role. And even ashwagandha combined with yoga also. All recommendations have come now from the Ministry of Health actually. They were initially by my committee, which was a part of Ministry of Ayush, but they have been released by Dr. Harshvardhan a few days back. And then again, for the very early cases, when these are just asymptomatic positive, what to do with those people? Do they need something? So there are alternatives like Dr. Pankaj talked about ashwagandha, there are guduchi, pipali. They are again from the 8th century onward. They are nothing new one, they are the old Ayurvedic formulations. And the same type of formulations exist in the Siddha system also. I have not analyzed the homeopathy because no data was presented to me actually. Our committee looked at only the Ayurveda and yoga actually. So we made recommendation on both of them. Otherwise, for the clinical care, what is happening is in the modern medicine, by evidence-based, you are generating data, you're collecting the experience and going from one step to another, whether one to use or not to use. There's absolutely sensible approach because you can't risk your lives. You have to use something where the evidence emerges. So I will not talk of the moderate or the severe disease. We never made any recommendation there because we didn't have data on that. Because as a scientist, I'll only look at where the data was there. So based on the data on the immunomodulatory properties, on the data on the similar syndromes, and same kind of effect, we made recommendations for Ayurveda and yoga, which are a part of the ministry's protocol actually. They are recommended to be used by Ayurvedic, where the Ayurvedic physician is there along with, or where the person knows about that. Is not anybody can't use that actually because that's the Supreme Court ruling. So I think these alternate medical systems in a complementary role in certain situations should be explored because it's for people's benefit. And you can have a lot of experts of every area are available in India actually. They are there. It's not that they're not there actually. So you can be working along with where you want to work with certain populations. But I talked about the early asymptomatic cases and also particularly the post-COVID care. I think they should be looked at there. So I think if you look at from where you go from here to now, all these recommendations, they are very dynamic and they should be. More data will emerge. More data will emerge on the allopathic protocols which are being tried. A huge number are there even on our in India CTRI's registration. More than 45 or 47 they are on which are using the Ayush also. So I think that these protocols will tell you what to do, what not to do. So I think the future is the emerging scene, which we will have a lot of data as the time moves. But I think today's this webinar with the Dr. Ganga Khedkar's presentation, a very comprehensive one, and with the all other experts, they've talked about their own experiences. They have really shown, that things are moving and the things are moving towards better. But it's a long fight. It's not. We can't wish away. Then we should not be speculative. Also, it is going. It is coming. Forget about modeling. It is going to be there. So the numbers don't count. Even the Rajasthan, one of the ex-health ministers, died with H1N1 8 years later after the pandemic was gone. So I think this enemy cannot be wished away tomorrow. So I think let's change permanently. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot. And I'll just present a virtual memento. So since Dr. Ganga Khedkar has to leave because of the internet problems, we felicitate Dr. Raman Ganga Khedkar and our guest of honor, Dr. V.M. Katoch. Thank you very much, sir, for your presence and staying us throughout this thing. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Dr. N.K. Mathur, sir, who is there. Dr. Viren Singh, he has to leave for some lung transplant. Surgeons had come with him. Dr. Nitya also had to leave in between. She was throughout there, but at the 11th hour, she had to go to the hospital. Dr. Puneet Rijwani, we are thankful to them. Dr. Alok Mathur, Dr. Jaswant Goyal, Dr. Raghav Shah, Dr. Puneet Gupta, Dr. R.K. Porwal, Dr. Pankaj Verma, Dr. Madhur Joshi, and Dr. Rishabh Bansal. Thanks to all, and stay home, stay safe, and thank you very much. So too late, and probably there's not much time left for some questions in the chat box that will be dealt. And thank you very much. Thanks a lot, and good night, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Arun Joshi. He's from Dubai. Dr. Satyesh from England. Dr. Kamlesh Oja also from England. Dr. Rajesh from Bikaner, and Dr. Rajesh Rajgopalan, our this thing. Dr. Arun, how are you? Nice.
Thank you, sir. Namaskar. Very well organized, sir. It was like an eye opener and updation of whatever has been happening in last 10 months, especially starting from the first speaker, great Dr. Raman, and Dr. Katoch is there, our great teachers, all great teachers, and it was like going through a textbook and up to date, practical as well as theoretical thing. And I wish there were more people, and I had asked certain questions, but you might have seen this. And
maybe because of the late timings and all that, sir.
Yeah, sir. Can I make one comment in continuation with Dr. Katoch, sir?
Oh, sure.
I think one of the previous talks, webinars also, this whatever is available in our Ayurveda, application of the active ingredients in allopathic, especially in dermatology. There are, and the talk was going on inflammatory properties of curcumin and black pepper derivatives and aloe vera. This Ayush ministry is there, and I think there should be more studies, more research, and allopathic institutions on this. And reviewing of literature, find there is more paper being done on active ingredients by Chinese yes, on piperine and from black pepper and curcumin and aloe vera. Yes, and they avoid the side effects of the steroids and other things, and they can be useful in so many conditions. And that's really required, sir. And this knowledge is there; it needs to be integrated. Good that this thing is yes, sir.
Thank you very much once again to all, and thanks a lot, and good night to everyone, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.